Welcome back to my playthrough of Monster Hunter World. Now, what you're going to notice is this video just jumps straight to Xeno'jiiva. More or less what has happened is I just straight up decided that I didn't really particularly want to put the videos up of doing all the fights building up to this point. I talked about it a little bit in the last one, but where I'm using the Defender set to try to get to Iceborne, which is where some actual decent challenges exist, everything has been kind of going down really fast. And what you'll see is Xeno'jiiva was probably the first thing that actually posed even a slight threat, because some of its attacks, not all of them, actually did a little bit of damage, but even it's pretty easy. Realistically, probably won't start facing any serious threats until about Master Rank 6, but at least in Master Rank, everything actually stands a better chance of killing me, which I guess you'll see with the Juratotus hunt, or not Juratotus, Beototus. We'll talk about him in just a minute, though. So, I did decide ultimately to just skip the rest of this stuff because the fights just weren't interesting. There was one kind of cool moment when Devil Joe invaded one of the fights pretty early on, and he kind of did it from a way where the camera was pointing more towards the monster, so it's like he ran in from off screen for me and attacked the monster. But, you know, I'm sure you all have seen that a million times in other footage, so I'm not going to be too tore up over having to leave that behind. Alright, so what's the format for the Iceborne video is going to be? Since this is mostly just a let me see how far I can get before Wilds comes out, and to be honest with you, I'm not investing a super huge amount of time in this. The whole point of this being a mediocre playthrough is, number one, I have a full-time job outside of this. Number two, I have a family. Both of those things take a substantially higher priority than putting time into making videos for a YouTube channel that's not even making any money. At this point, this is just for fun. It's something I've always been kind of curious whether or not I could actually pull off building up even a moderately decent channel. So, putting a little bit of effort into it, at least what bit of time I do have that doesn't take away from those other two things, which are extremely important that they're maintained. So, we'll see how far I get, and then maybe after Wilds has been out for a little while, come back to it and finish the playthrough. But for now, it's mostly just a, let me see how many monsters I can squeeze in on the limited time that a man with a family and a full-time job can do. And also, I'm not super great. I've been playing Monster Hunter forever. I would say I'm on the upper end of mediocre, but I don't think I'm so much good as I am just better than average. But even then, you'll see I make tons of mistakes. Now, part of that's because I'm wearing the Defender set and using the Defender weapon, so I don't really have to be all that careful. But part of that is because I actually do have some experience, so I like kind of face tanking stuff. So when I get to the point where stuff like Furious Rajang's around, it gets a little bit harder on me, because you actually have to be careful in those fights. But for now, it's no big deal. So ultimately what I'm going to end up doing with the Iceborne videos is however many monsters I have done when I'm working on the video from the previous day, I'll just try to squeeze them in. So maybe that the fights get sped up a little bit. The Xeno'jiiva one's going through at standard speed, and I'll just leave it playing after I finish talking because it was the only fight that's in this video, so there's no real reason to speed it up. But if I have a whole bunch of them, I'm not going to put an hour-long video of me just silently fighting monsters. Also, and I'm going to do this in Wilds, I'll edit out all the running around and like maintenance style stuff that happens in between fights. I don't see any real reason to make you guys watch me just fool around with my inventory or go through upgrade weapons, craft stuff, blah blah blah. Some of it I may put in, like whenever I'm doing some farming to change my build. Like my current plan is I'm following a path by a guy that, at the moment, you have to pardon me, hold on, let me look him up real quick so I can actually put his name in here. Alright, Lighted Up Dan. He put out a pretty good video about 2 months ago that shows the weapon progression path, and I'm pretty much following his path. So around Master Rank 6 will be when I start changing my gear. So I might actually show some of that grind, just fast forward it a little bit, just to show actually transitioning out of the Defender set into something else. And it's partly going to depend on exactly how much grinding I have to do, because the goal is kind of to see how far I get, so if necessary I might just skip grinding out some of the weapons and stuff, just to see if I can push really deep into Master Rank before Friday. And then when Friday rolls around, I'll actually start recording some wilds footage. And what I'm going to do with it is try to cut out any of the cinematics, basically try to keep the videos spoiler-ish free, even though there's going to be monster fights in them. And the titles will be more or less part 1, part 2, part 3, blah, 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 because those will be which successive fight comes next in the storyline. That way, if people want to watch it, they can kind of count up how far along they are, but not necessarily worry about being spoiled. A couple months down the line, I wouldn't worry about doing that. Like right now, I'm not worried about spoiling anything in Iceborne or World, simply because they've been out so long. At this point, if you get spoiled, it's on you. But for Wilds, at least for a little bit, I'm going to try to keep the titles and the thumbnails spoiler-free. So what I'll probably do is take the thumbnail that I use for the video where Arkveld stomps me around, just use that as the thumbnail for Wilds, because it'd be really hard to avoid seeing the images of Arkveld at this point. So I don't think he's too much of a spoiler. Now, let's talk a little bit about Wilds, speaking of spoilers. So, from this point, you may want to just either skip out on the rest of the video, or I'll try to actually put in a timestamp once this is over with as to when I stop discussing the wild spoilers if you want to jump ahead and just watch the rest of the fight. But I thought it'd be fun to just discuss the plans for like my personal hunting style in Wilds. So first, weapon selection. This whole series started as me trying to get a little bit of prep work in with the gun lance, because I think I'm going to start out with gun lance. But given the weapon switching and the fact that your offensive skills are actually attached to your weapon and not the armor, I feel like it'll be a lot easier to flip-flop around and jump between different weapon sets in Wilds than what it's ever been. So it may be the first game where it's really, truly viable to multi-class, so to speak, without very much penalty. And as such, anytime I feel the desire to try out a different weapon, I'm going to do that for a few videos. So it may end up being one of those cases where it's jack of all trades, master of none, but the reality is it's not like I'm a master of this game anyway. But at the moment, gun lance is my number one plan. I really enjoy Charge Blade, but I have played it in several games at this point, so I'm trying not to fall to temptation to play it again. But there's a few things I want to test out. Like, I'd like, even though in the tier rankings and meta rankings and whatnot, so far the light bowgun and heavy bowgun aren't looking that great, they look like they're actually finally in an iteration that wouldn't irritate me. Ammo maintenance has always been an irritant for me, so given the changes to how ammo works, that's actually made them seem kind of appealing. Otherwise, gun lance, charge blade, and I've always been partial to lance. That was the very first weapon I played. I played it in try, and I haven't really mained it since then. And I've seen that it's gotten very, very offensive lately, rather than being more of a defensive style weapon. So I'm kind of curious how it would feel to really put some time into it. So it might get some playtime in Wilds, but we'll see. Next thing are the little pop-up camps. I can't remember what they're called right now. The field camps, there we go. I know you have a limit as to how many you can set up, and to me, that's feeling akin to Clutch Claw. Like, you see me actually using Clutch Claw in the video footage from Iceborne so far, but in my main playthrough of the game, like when I was just playing on my own, I didn't use it that much because I didn't like having to pop onto the monster part, tenderize it, then beat around, and I didn't like doing wall bangs. All of that stuff I kind of avoided. I just like beating on the monster with a weapon. Just as a side note, I feel like focus mode is sort of the replacement for tenderizing in Wilds, because you just passively apply the wounds and then you use focus mode to pop them, and I think that's a better alternative. Because of the fact that you just passively do the application and then you have to actively choose to switch to your point where you use those applications, rather than having to completely interrupt the flow of the fight to apply the thing and then try to get back into the hang of things. So I think it's a better alternative to tenderizing. But anyway, back on topic. The field camps, what I'm probably just going to end up doing is looking up what the most meta places are to put them. So what the most efficient spots are to set up your field games. Put them in those spots and then forget about it and just pretend like they're permanent outposts. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of them being mobile. I would much rather them just say, okay, here's some optimal spots to put some teleport points. Set up your camps here, turn in some stuff, do that, like just like the Monster Hunter World system. But who knows? Could turn out to be something fantastic, and I'm just being cynical. But I feel like that's going to be the feature that I'd kind of utilize the least. Now, what about the monsters revealed so far? I think they actually all look really cool. The area I'm most excited about is Oil Well Basin, because Gogmazios is one of my favorite monsters ever, and it seems like if he's ever going to make a second appearance in a series, that would be the place where he'd pop up. But all that aside, New Udra looks awesome. Ajar Khan looks fantastic. Rompom Polo is weird but interesting. That whole area just looks bizarre but fun. So I'm really looking forward to hitting that area. Everything else looks cool too. Like the new monsters so far I have found pretty impressive. Oddly enough, the one that I find the least interesting is Doshogama. But, I mean, he's seemingly an early monster, so that's not that big a deal. He'll be left behind pretty quickly. So, not all that terribly worried about it. Otherwise, the beta, from the gameplay that I got to experience, I think it's going to be fun. It feels pretty good. There's always this weird, awkward period when you're switching from one Monster Hunter to another, where you have to get used to the new controls. That, weirdly enough, if you go back and you play an older game that you played before, it's more akin to hopping on a bicycle, so you can pick right back up where you left off. But when you're playing a new one, there's this odd adjustment period where you feel like a newborn giraffe and you're just kind of hobbling around and trying not to die to things that you know you otherwise will never die to again. That's sort of the phase that I felt like I didn't really pump tons of time into the beta because I didn't want to get burnt out before the game comes out. So, I don't know. We'll see. I'm really hyped for it. I think it's going to be excellent, but I could be wrong. Typically, whenever I get that hyped, usually I find myself end up being disappointed, but so far Monster Hunter hasn't done that. So far, every Monster Hunter game that's come out has been pretty accurate in the impressions that they give beforehand, and you pretty much get exactly what they show you. So I'm not terribly worried about it turning out to be bad. But that's just my thoughts on the beta so far. So that's the end of the sort of spoiler section. So I'm going to try to avoid talking about wilds for the rest of this. I'm actually going to try to wrap this up here in just a minute so that you guys can have at least a little bit of quiet time with the fight for Xeno'jiiva. Now, one thing that I would be interested in hearing in anyone that actually watched to this point, what do you think about face cam? I have other videos on this channel and shorts that have my face in it, so I'm not really opposed to having it in there. Do you prefer game footage where someone has a face cam in the corner, or would you rather just have full screen fights? Personally, I feel like it'd be better just saving face for like shorts and whatnot. I don't really feel like any of y'all need to see a dude that looks like Eric's but with slightly softer chromosomes in the corner of the screen while Monster Hunter's playing. But just let me know what you think in the comments. Right. Other than that, maybe some comments on the current fight, because I haven't actually said anything about the fight that's going on. Xeno'jiiva was a really cool fight the first time that it came around. As far as in-game bosses, he's about like every other Monster Hunter, where the quote-unquote final boss is really nowhere near as hard as pretty much anything else in the game. Now, by that I mean the final storyline boss. Storyline bosses always seem to be relatively easy, like Sadeas and Tri. Who was it before you? Gore Magala? Not Gore, but Shigaru. You know what I'm talking about. Like, the in-game dude's not terribly bad. Shara Ishvalda coming up in Iceborne, not a really bad, hard in-game fight. Most of the final storyline bosses are pretty simple. And even the quote-unquote hard form of him that came out later on just wasn't that bad. It's a cool-looking fight, and it's a really good spectacle the first time around. Although, I guess with him, Xeno'jiiva did kind of give him a bit of redemption since that's his adult form, and that fight was actually really cool. Um, but, I don't know. It was a good first time around. It's kind of like Zora Magdaros. Everyone complains about him now, but it was a fun fight when it first came out. It's just like this guy. It's long, but it was really cool the first time around, and it really did leave you feeling like you had went through an event the first time you hit him. Because this gear is super good, and it still takes forever to chip his stuff down. Now, granted, that's because I'm playing a weapon that I'm pretty poor with so far. But it still takes a while to chip his big health pool down. Once you finally get him down, though, it did feel like a pretty big sense of accomplishment the first time around. So they're good at doing that, building up monsters, putting them as an integral part of the story, and then they just... It fits for the time, but there's not a lot of replay value in them. So they tend to have cool armor and whatnot, but it also makes it make sense as to why a lot of the times the final storyline bosses don't exactly have the best skills and stuff on their armor. There's usually usable pieces, and this guy's gear was just like the rest of them. There's some pretty cool stuff with it, but they're not the ones that have the be-all, end-all best sets of the game. And I think it's partly that they want the spectacle, and it's really hard to get both the spectacle and a fair and balanced fight. I guess Xeno'jiiva would be a bit of an exception to that. But I was like, let's say with Sunbreak, Geismagorm was pretty easy. And let's see, Ibushi and Narwa were really simple in just baseline rise. But yeah, Xeno'jiiva is the only one I can think of that was actually a bit of a challenge, just all on his own. But a cool fight nonetheless. Anyway, this dude was really cool. I'm satisfied with the fight. The next video will be Beototus, and it'll probably be mostly me just complaining about Piscine Wyverns like 90% of the rest of the Monster Hunter fan base. So, I'll see you there. That should be up tomorrow. It'll probably also include Benbaro, but I'm not sure exactly how many more fights I can get done tonight before basically I have to go to bed to be sure I'm not exhausted for work tomorrow. Have a good night, everyone, and leave your thoughts and comments down below, and let me know anything else you'd like to see in these videos moving forward. Have a good day.